Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a huge video as the first social media reactions for Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning just dropped. Before we go over them, make sure to leave a like as it does help out a lot. But our first reaction comes from Ethan. He says, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is everything you want out of an action movie and oh so much more. It is the movie event of the year. The most insane stunts I've ever seen, the most heart and Mission Impossible movie has ever had. It's why you go to the movies, plain and simple, 5 stars. So we're going to be going over some other reactions here. I got like 8 other ones to go through, but the first one I'm looking at is really positive. I'm loving what I'm reading here. I mean, I'm so excited for this movie. It's been my most anticipated movie for the past 2 years, ever since, Dead Reckoning, or let's call it Dead Reckoning Part 1, because they had to change the title. The first trailer got me hooked. The second trailer got me even more hooked. I cannot wait. He said the stunts are crazy. And he said, it's why we go to the movies. Yes, this is why we go to the movies. To see Tom Cruise risk his life to do these crazy stunts. Because he's actually doing these stunts. I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know how you're going to believe me. But he's doing these stunts. You can see the behind the scenes footage. He's doing these things. And it's literally insane. And Ethan's calling it the most moving Mission Impossible movie. That's an interesting statement because I not a lot of them are moving, I'd say, except for Fallout. Fallout is a really moving film. The last 20 minutes is especially moving with bringing Michelle Monaghan back. So I'm very excited about that. We have another reaction from Brad saying Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is a thrilling, emotional, and satisfying conclusion to one of the cinema's greatest sagas. While it drags in the middle, this leads into a third act more breathtaking and pulse pounding than you can imagine. The plane sequence is an all-timer. So from that reaction, I can probably 90% guarantee that the plane sequence is that third act stunt that we're getting to. I was a little confused from the trailers, kind of guessing, is the plane sequence the third act? Is the submarine sequence the third act? I always thought it was the submarine sequence, but now I'm thinking it's the plane sequence. Brad is saying it did drag a little bit in the middle. I did read some reactions before this video, some good, some, mixed. I haven't really seen any bad reactions. I'd say like 80% good and then 20% a little mixed on it. But you also have a lot of people that didn't really enjoy Dead Reckoning, but I love Dead Reckoning. I saw it like 5 times in the theater. So it's interesting to talk about that. And Brad says, it drags in the middle, but I've also seen people say it drags in the first act. So, it's just going to be your opinion on how you like these movies to be, how long you want them. Because this movie's 2 hours and 50 minutes. Dead Reckoning was 240, 245, something like that. And I didn't really think it was that long. So it's just how long you like the movie. Will you think it's paced well? You'll just have to see when you watch the movie for yourself. Fico says that Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is another blockbuster banger and insanely entertaining solid closing to 30 years of amazing impossible missions on the big screen. Tom Cruise adds to his legend. 2 sequences had my jaw to the floor, shaking my head. Go see it. Big and loud. I do agree with those final statements. You got to see these movies big and loud. I remember seeing Dead Reckoning in IMAX. It is the best way to see this. Dolby's also great, but they did film part of this movie in IMAX. I think it was like 45 minutes or something in IMAX. Probably most of the plane sequence and the submarine stuff. He's talking about, closing a 30-year franchise. It's crazy that this franchise has been going on for 30 years. Who knew that we'd be getting these movies after Mission Impossible 2 and how bad that movie is? I think it's a bad movie, but I still did enjoy, rewatching it as part of my rewatch of all these movies. Because just this weekend, I'm going to be rewatching Dead Reckoning again. Very hyped. But man, this rewatch is insane. I'm hearing, we'll get some callbacks to the previous movies. And I think that's an excellent idea. But now we got a reaction from Austin. He says, if Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning really is the final mission, they went out on a great note. While I still believe that Fallout is the peak, The Final Reckoning is full of white knuckle tension and set pieces are jaw dropping in an IMAX. Wow. Yeah, just as I was saying, you gotta go see this movie in IMAX. It's probably gonna be nuts in there. Then you got another reaction from Kinsey who says Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning is a summer spectacle of non-stop adrenaline and me asking if Tom Cruise is okay the entire movie. There's a bit too much going on at all times, but still a good time at the movies. I can kind of agree with that. Dead Reckoning also had, a lot going on at once, but did that ruin the experience for me? In which I think Mission Impossible movies are basically all the experience. I'm going into Mission Impossible not really for the story. That's kind of secondary, but firstly, I'm going in for the action, for the experience, for the stunts, for the man himself, Tom Cruise. And if there's a lot going on, I'm fine with that. We'll see how I feel about the movie, next week when my review comes out. But right now, I feel like I can take a lot, especially with this being the last movie. Calling this a summer spectacle, it should be called a summer spectacle. Tom Cruise has, been the summer guy for, the last couple years. Ever since Top Gun Maverick came out during the summer, kind of revived movie theaters again after, there's a down period after Spider Man No Way Home. And Top Gun Maverick was a huge summer spectacle. Dead Reckoning was, a decent summer spectacle, but it came out at just a horrible time with Barbie and Oppenheimer coming out basically, what was it, like a week or 2 weeks after it. So it didn't have a lot of time by itself, but hopefully Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning does have time to shine as that summer spectacle. Kristen says, as someone that was mid on the last Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning sticks the landing, masterfully edited, the ensemble cast works beautifully, plenty of callbacks to the original series in service of a fitting conclusion, had a blast. So we have someone here that was, kind of middle of the road on Dead Reckoning, but they really thought that this one was great. So you're going to get, that double-sided reaction of some people who maybe didn't like Dead Reckoning as much as some of the others, but they really like this one. Or maybe some people that didn't like Dead Reckoning and also don't like Final Reckoning. It makes sense because it's a part one, part two, even though they don't want to call that anymore. So if you didn't like part one, you might not like part two. If you didn't like part one, you might like part two. Who knows? Just go in for yourself. But we have Brian saying Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning is a shot of adrenaline straight from Tom Cruise's heart. The 3 hour runtime breezes by, set pieces live up to the hype, not to mention the jaw-dropping sequence that is not included in the trailers, the most moving of the franchise by far. So this is the second reaction calling it the most moving of the franchise. In the first reaction that says it has a jaw-dropping sequence that's not been included in the trailers. I'm very excited to see what that sequence is, because if you remember Dead Reckoning, when that came out, that cliff sequence is the biggest sequence in the film. You could say the train sequence also, it's kind of the same thing, but the cliff sequence was the biggest sequence in that film, and they showed that pretty much the whole scene all in the marketing leading up to the movie, which kind of ruined that sequence, feeling it in the theaters. With this one, the plane sequence I've heard is the biggest scene, and we really haven't seen that much of the plane sequence. We've seen a couple of, 5-second parts of it, and it's probably going to be much longer than that. And then we have a sequence that's not even in the trailers, so I'm so hyped about that. Brian also says that the 3 hour runtime breezes by. So, as I said, it's just all going to be up to personal opinion how you like these Mission Impossible movies. If you love a lot of exposition and nostalgia, you'll probably also think the 3 hour runtime breezes by. If you don't love exposition, all that in these Mission Impossible movies, then you probably will not like the runtime or the pace. But as I said, it all just comes down to personal preference on that. We have two more reactions to get to. The first one comes from Amon. He says, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning, the first hour gets bogged down in exposition, but once it gets out of its own way, it soars. Incredible set pieces. Tom Cruise remains the world's most entertaining madman, and Tremel Tillman is one scene-stealing form, liked it. So he didn't love it, but he did like it. Tremel Tillman, the first, mention of him. We've, had some mentions of the whole cast ensemble being just beautiful together, amazing together. Tremel Tillman is, a scene-stealing guy in this. You could probably guess that from the trailers. You can already see him in that one scene. He already looks so cool. He's in Severance. He stole that entire show, that entire second season, man. He stole that season. He's so good. Tremel Tillman needs to be in more stuff, and I cannot wait to see him in this movie. But another reaction that says the first hour gets a little bogged down in exposition. And I kind of understand why they did that, why there's probably so much exposition there. And it's probably because a lot of people are going into this one maybe forgetting what happened in Dead Reckoning, or maybe didn't even see it because its box office wasn't that high because of Barbie and Oppenheimer coming after it. This is the final one, so you got to have a decent amount of exposition. and you should probably expect a decent amount when the movie's pretty much 3 hours long. But our last reaction comes from Ezra. He says, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning plays like a greatest hits in the best ways. A gleefully bombastic ride that feels more impossible than any other entry. From the reverence for the franchise's history to Tom Cruise's all-time great stunts, it's an exhilarating finale. So that's our last reaction that I'm going to go over. There's many other reactions that you guys can go look up on your own. But as I said, I think that these reactions are pretty good for the movie. It's also, as I've been saying, go see the movie for yourself. I'm seeing it for myself next week. Very excited. Opening night. It's going to be an exhilarating ride. Ezra's calling this gleefully bombastic ride. I feel like that's a great term to call the Mission Impossible films. And this one is more impossible than any other entry. If you got to up the ante, you got to up the ante and just make it more impossible. Because, we've been all been feeling, we're like, are you sure these missions aren't actually possible? Because they seem pretty possible when Tom Cruise is doing them. I'm like, he's getting the missions done, so I'm not sure they're impossible, but who knows? Maybe this one is truly impossible. But I'm loving what I'm hearing. I kind of think that these reactions are what I noticed out of Dead Reckoning. A lot of people, are kind of mixed on Dead Reckoning. This is kind of where we're at with Final Reckoning, but more people that were mixed on Dead Reckoning are still liking Final Reckoning. And a lot of people still think the exposition kind of hurts, the runtime kind of hurts it a little bit. But then you're seeing fans truly love it. And when I'm looking at these reactions on Twitter, I looked at some other ones not included at this video. A lot of like true Mission Impossible fans that I've followed for a while. A lot of just like normal people that go to the movies. I'd say normal in a way where they don't watch like 15 to 20 movies in theaters a month, are seriously loving it. They're thinking it's amazing. That's all we kind of want. We want people to go back to the theaters, and people are calling this movie, a true theater experience. See it on the biggest screen possible, IMAX. So if your general audiences are loving it, then I think it's going to be fine in the long run. Hopefully it makes a decent amount of money. We don't know. Wonder what that Rotten Tomatoes score will be. But man, these first reactions have me very excited. I don't know how you guys feel in the comments. Let me know. Do you have your tickets booked? Why not? If not, you gotta book them now. But I'm so excited to see this movie. I'll be reviewing it next week when I see it. But let me know down below in the comments, what did you think of the first reactions for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning? I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.